Good good morning. It's Monday, 28th, and as I continue to salute Haile Selassie, I am going to go back to 1936 when Haile Selassie spoke to the League of Nations in regards to the terror that was being rained upon his nation by Mussolini and the Italians. I also want to say happy anniversary to the 28th of August, 1963, 55 years ago, when, 54 years ago, when 200,000 blacks and whites traveled to Washington, D.C. for a rally for jobs and freedom. A day in which became famous because of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, but many other speakers were on the agenda that day. And we confronted the issue of our civil rights and our rights to be human and not savages, not thought of as beasts or second-class citizens or ignorant or whatever else white people thought of people of color in 1963. In his words, my voice, Haile Selassie, Day 2. I, Haile Selassie, Haile Selassie the first, Emperor of Ethiopia, am here today to claim that justice, which is due to my people and the assistance promised it 8 months ago, when the 50 nations asserted that no aggression had been committed in violation of international treaties. There is no precedent for a head of state himself speaking to this assembly, but there is also no precedent for people being a victim of such injustice and being at present threatened by abandonment to its aggressor. Also, there has never been before any example of any government proceeding to the systematic extermination of a nation by barbarous means, in violation of the most solemn promises made by nations of the earth, that there should not be used against innocent human beings the terrible poison of harmful gases. It is to defend a people struggling for its age-old independence that the head of the Ethiopian Empire has come to Geneva to fulfill this supreme duty, after having himself fought at the head of his armies. I pray to Almighty God that he may spare nations the terrible sufferings that have just been inflicted on my people, and of which the chiefs who accompany me here have been the horrified witnesses. It is my duty to inform the governments assembled in Geneva, responsible as they are for millions of women, children, and men, of the deadly peril which threatens them, by describing to them the fate which has been suffered by Ethiopia. It is not only upon warriors that the Italian government has made war. It has above all attacked populations far removed from hostilities in order to terrorize and exterminate them. At the beginning, towards the end of 1935, Italian aircraft hurled onto my army's bombs of tear gas. Their effects were but slight. The soldiers learned to scatter, waiting until the wind had dissipated the poisonous gases. The Italian aircraft then resorted to mustard gas, barrels of liquid hurled upon armed groups. But this means was also not effective. The liquid affected only a few soldiers, and barrels upon the ground were themselves a warning to troops and to the populations of danger. It was at that time, when the operations for the encircling of Macau were taking place, that the Italian command, fearing a rout, followed the procedure which is now my duty to denounce to the entire world. Special sprayers were installed on board aircraft so that they could vaporize over vast areas of territory a fine, death-dealing rain. Groups of 9, 15, 18 aircraft followed one another so that the fog issued from them formed a continuous sheet. It was thus that from the end of January 1936, men, soldiers, women, children, cattle, rivers, lakes, and pastures were drenched continually with this deadly rain. In order to kill off systematically all living creatures, in order to move to more surely poisoned waters and pastures, the Italian command made its aircraft pass over and over and over again. That was its chief method of warfare. Ravage and terror. The very refinement of barbarism consisted in the carrying ravage and terror into the most densely populated parts of the country, the points furthest removed from the scenes of hostilities. The object was to scatter fear and death over a great part of the Ethiopian territory. These fearful tactics succeeded. Men and women succumbed. Men and animals succumbed. The deadly rain that fell from the aircraft made all of those whom it touched fly shrieking with pain. All those who drank the poisoned waters or ate the infected food also succumbed in dreadful suffering. And tens of thousands of victims of the Italian mustard gas fell. It is in order to denounce to the civilized world the tortures inflicted upon the Ethiopian people that I resolved to come to Geneva today. None other than myself and my brave companions in arms could bring the United Nations the undeniable proof. The appeals of my delegates addressed to the League of Nations have remained without answer. My delegates have not been witnesses. That is why I have decided to come myself to bear witness against the crimes perpetrated against my people and to give Europe a warning of doom that awaits it if it should bow before the accomplished fate or fact. It is necessary to remind the assemblance of various stages of the Ethiopian drama. For 20 years past, either as heir apparent, regent of the empire, or emperor, I have never ceased to use all my efforts to bring my country the benefits of civilization, and in particular to establish good relations of good neighborhoodness with adjacent powers. In particular, I succeeded in concluding with Italy the Treaty of Friendship of 1928, which absolutely prohibited the resort under any pretext whatsoever to force of arms, substituting for force and pressure the conciliation and arbitration on which more civilized nations have based international order. Countries more united. In this report, January 5th, 1932, the Committee of 13 recognized my efforts and the result that I had achieved. The governments thought that the entry of Ethiopia into the League, whilst giving that country a new guarantee for the maintenance of her territorial integrity and independence, would help her to reach a higher level of civilization. It does not seem that in Ethiopia today there is more disorder and insecurity than in 1923. On the contrary, the country is more united and the central power is better obeyed. I should have procured still greater results for my people if obstacles of every kind had not been put in the way by the Italian government, the government which stirred up the revolt and armed the rebels. Indeed, the Rome government, as it has today openly proclaimed, has never ceased to prepare for the conquest of Ethiopia. The treaties of friendship it signed with me were not sincere. Their only object was to hide its real intention from me. The Italian government asserts that for 14 years it has been preparing for its present conquest. It therefore recognizes today that when it supported the admission of Ethiopia to the League of Nations in 1923, and when it concluded the Treaty of Friendship in 1928, and when it signed the Pact of Paris outlawing war, it was deceiving the whole world. The Ethiopian government was, in these solemn treaties, given additional guarantees of security which would enable it to achieve further progress along the specific path of reform on which it had set its feet and to which it was devoting all of its strength and all of its heart. The War pretext. The War incident in December 1934 came as a thunderbolt to me. The Italian provocation was obvious, and I did not hesitate to appeal to the League of Nations. I invoked provisions of the Treaty of 1928, the principles of the Covenant. I urged the procedure of conciliation and arbitration. Unhappily for Ethiopia, this was a time when a certain government considered that the European situation made it imperative at all costs to obtain the friendship of Italy. The price paid was the abandonment of Ethiopian independence for the greed of the Italian government. This secret agreement, contrary to the obligations of the covenant, have exerted a great influence over the course of events. Ethiopia and the whole world has suffered and are still suffering today its disastrous consequences. The first violation of the covenant was followed by many others. Feeling itself encouraged in its policy against Ethiopia, the Rome government feverishly made war preparations, thinking that the concerted pressure which was beginning to be exerted on the Ethiopian government might perhaps not overcome the resistance of my people to Italian domination. The time has come, thus all sorts of difficulties have been placed in a way with a view to breaking up the procedures of conciliation and arbitration. All kinds of obstacles were placed in the way of that procedure. Governments tried to prevent the Ethiopian government from finding arbitrators amongst their nationals. When once the arbitrary tribunal was set up, pressure was exercised so that an award favorable of Italy should be given. All this was in vain. The arbitrators, two of whom were Italian officials, were forced to recognize unanimously that in the War incident, as in subsequent incidents, no international responsibility was to be attributed to Ethiopia in peace efforts. Following this award, the Ethiopian government sincerely thought that an era of friendly relations might open up with Italy. I loyally offered my hand to the Roman government. The Assembly was informed by a report of the Committee of 13 dated October 5, 1935, on the details of the events which occurred after the month of December 1934 and up to October 3, 1935. It will be sufficient if I quote a few of the conclusions of that report, numbered 24, 25, and 26. The Italian memorandum containing the complaints made by Italy was laid on the council table on September 4, 1935, whereas Ethiopia's first appeal to the council had been made on December 14, 1934. In the interval between the two dates, the Italian government opposed the consideration of the question by the council on the grounds that only appropriate procedure was that provided for was in the Italo-Ethiopian Treaty of 1928. Throughout the whole of that period, moreover, the dispatch of Italian troops to East Africa was proceeding. These shipments of troops were represented to the council by the Italian government as necessary for the defense of colonies menaced by Ethiopia's preparations. In its opinion, left no doubt as to the hostile intentions of the Italian government from the outset of the dispute. The Ethiopian government has sought a settlement by peaceful means. It appealed to the procedures of the covenant. The Italian government, desiring to keep strictly to the procedures of the Italo-Ethiopian Treaty of 1928, the Ethiopian government assented. It invariably stated that it would faithfully carry out the arbitrary award should it not be dealt with by the arbitrators, because the Italian government would not agree to such course. It asked the council to dispatch neutral observers and offered to lend itself to any inquiries upon which the council might decide. Once the War dispute had been settled by arbitration, however, the Italian government submitted its detailed memorandum to the council in support of its claim to liberty of action. It asserted that a case like that of Ethiopia cannot be settled by means provided by the covenant. It stated that since this question affects vital interests and is of primary importance to Italian security and civilization, it would be failing in its most elementary duty if it did not cease once and for all to place any confidence in Ethiopia, reserving full liberty to adopt any measures that may become necessary to ensure the safety of its colonies and to safeguard its own interests. The covenant was violated. Those are the terms of the report of the Committee of 13. The Council and the Assembly unanimously adopted the conclusion that the Italian government had violated the covenant and was in a state of aggression. I did not hesitate to declare that I did not wish for war, that it was imposed upon me, and I should struggle solely for the independence and integrity of my people, and that in that struggle I was the defender of the cause of all small states exposed to the greed of a powerful neighbor. And in October 1935, the 52 nations who are listening to me today gave me assurance that the aggressor would not triumph, that the resources of the covenant would be employed in order to ensure the reign of right and the failure of violence. I ask 52 nations not to forget today the policies upon which they embarked 8 months ago, and on faith of which I directed the resistance of my people against the aggressor whom they had denounced to the world. Despite the inferiority of my weapons, the complete lack of aircraft, artillery, munitions, hospital services, my confidence in the League was absolute. I thought it would be impossible that 52 nations, including the most powerful in the world, should be successfully opposed by a single aggressor. Counting on the faith due to treaties, I made no preparation for war, and that is the case with certain small countries in Europe. When the danger became more urgent, being aware of my responsibilities toward my people, during the first 6 months of 1935, I tried to acquire armaments. Many governments proclaimed an embargo to prevent my doing so, whereas the Italian government, through the Suez Canal, was given all facilities for transporting without cessation any protest, troops, arms, munitions. We were forced to mobilize. On August 3rd, 1935, the Italians invaded my territory. A few hours later, I decreed a general mobilization. In my desire to maintain peace, I had, following the example of a great country in Europe on the eve of the Great War, caused my troops to withdraw 30 kilometers so as to remove any pretext of provocation. War then took place in the atrocious conditions which I laid before the Assembly. In that unequal struggle between a government commanding more than 42 million inhabitants, having at its disposal financial, industrial, and technical means which enabled it to create unlimited quantities of the most death-dealing weapons, and on the other hand, a small people of 12 million inhabitants without arms, without resources, having on its side only the justice of its own cause and the promise of the League of Nations, what real assistance was given to Ethiopia by the 52 nations who had declared the Roman government guilty of a breach of the covenant and had undertaken to prevent the triumph of the aggressor? Has each of the state members, as it was its duty to do in virtue of its signature appended on Article 15 of the covenant, considered the aggressor as having committed an act of war personally directed against itself? I have placed all my hopes in the execution of these undertakings. My confidence has been confirmed by the repeated declarations made in the council to the effect that the aggressor must not be rewarded and that force would end by being compelled to bow before right. In December of 1935, the council made it clear that its feelings were in harmony with those of hundreds of millions of people who, in all parts of the world, had protested against the proposal to dismember Ethiopia. It was constantly repeated that there was not merely a conflict between the Italian government and the League of Nations, and that is why I personally refused all proposals to my personal advantage made by me by the Italian government, if only I would betray my people in the covenant of the League of Nations. I was defending the cause of all small people who are threatened with aggression. What of promises? What has become of the promise made to me long ago as October 1935? I noted with grief, but without much surprise, that three powers considered their undertakings under the covenant of absolutely no value. Their connections with Italy impelled them to refuse to take any measures whatsoever in order to stop Italian aggression. On the contrary, it was a profound disappointment to me to learn the attitude of a certain government which, whilst ever protesting its scrupulous attachment to the covenant, has tirelessly used all of its efforts to prevent its observation. As soon as any measure which was likely to be rapidly effective was proposed, various pretexts were devised in order to postpone even consideration of a measure. Did the secret agreements of January 1935 provide for this tireless obstruction? The Ethiopian government never expected other governments to shed their soldiers' blood to defend the covenant when their own immediate personal interests were not at stake. Ethiopian warriors asked only for means to defend themselves. On many occasions, I've asked for financial assistance for the purchase of arms. That assistance has been constantly refused me. What then in practice is the meaning of Article 16 of the covenant and of collective security? The Ethiopians' use of railways from Dajabor to Addis Ababa was in practice a hazardous regard transport of arms intended for the Ethiopian forces. At the present moment, this is the chief, if not only, means of supply for the Italian armies of occupation. The rules of neutrality should have prohibited transport intended for Italian forces, but it is not even neutrality, since Article 16 lays upon every member of the state of the League the duty not to remain neutral, but to come to the aid not of the aggressor, but of the victim of aggression. Has the covenant been respected? Is it today being respected? Finally, a statement has been made in their parliaments by the government of certain powers, amongst them the most influential members of the League of Nations that since the aggressor has succeeded in occupying a large part of Ethiopian territory, they propose not to continue the application of any economic or financial measures that may have been decided upon against the Italian government. These are the circumstances in which, at the request of the Argentine government, the Assembly of the League of Nations meets to consider the situation created by Italian aggression. I assert that the problem submitted to the Assembly today is a much wider one, and it is not merely a question of settlement of Italian aggression. The League is threatened. It is a collective security. It is the very existence of the League of Nations, its confidence that each state is to place in its international treaties. It is the value of promises made to small states that their integrity and their independence shall be respected and ensured. It is the principle of the equality of states on the one hand, and otherwise the obligation laid upon small powers to accept the bonds of vassalship. In a word, it is an international morality that is at stake, having the signatures appended to a treaty value only so far as the signatory powers have a personal, direct, and immediate interest involved. No subtlety can change the problem or shift the grounds of the discussion. It is in all sincerity that I submit these considerations to the Assembly. At a time when my people are threatened with extermination, when the support of the League may ward off the final blow, may I be allowed to speak with complete frankness without reticence, in all directness, such as demanded by the rule of equality as between the state members of the League. Apart from the kingdom of the Lord, there is not on this earth any nation that is superior to any other. Should it happen that a strong government finds it may with impunity destroy a weak people, then the hour strikes that for a weak people to appeal to the League of Nations to give its judgment in all freedom, God and history will remember your judgment. Assistance refused. I've heard it asserted that inadequate sanctions already applied have not achieved their object. At no time and under no circumstances could sanctions that were intentionally inadequate, intentionally badly implied, stop an aggressor. This is not a case of the impossibility of stopping an aggressor, but the refusal to stop an aggressor. When Ethiopia requests that she should be given financial assistance, was that measure which it was impossible to apply, whereas financial assistance of the League had been granted even in times of peace to two countries, and exactly two countries who have refused to apply sanctions against the aggressor. Faced with numerous violations by the Italian government of all international treaties that prohibit resorts to arms and the use of barbarous methods of warfare, it is my painful duty to note that the initiative has today been taken with a view of raising sanctions. Does this initiative not mean in practice the abandonment of Ethiopia to the aggressor? On the very eve of the day when I was about to attempt a supreme effort in the defense of my people before this assembly, does not this initiative deprive Ethiopia of one of her last chances to succeed in obtaining the support and guarantee of state members? Is that the guidance of the League of Nations and each of the state members that they are entitled to expect from the great powers when they assert their right and their duty to guide the action of the League? Placed by the aggressor face to face with the accomplished fact, are states going to set up the terrible precedents of bowing before force? Your assembly will doubtless have laid before it proposals for the reform of the covenant and for rendering more effective the guarantee of collective security. Is it the covenant that needs reform? What undertakings can have any value if the will to keep them is lacking. It is the international morality which is at stake and not the Articles of the Covenant. On behalf of the Ethiopian people, a member of the League of Nations, I request the Assembly to take all measures proper to ensure respect for the covenant. I renew my protest against the violations of treaties in which the Ethiopian people have been the victim. I declare in the face of the whole world that the emperor, the government, and the people of Ethiopia will not bow before force, that they will maintain their claims, that they will use all means in their power to ensure the triumph of right and the respect of the covenant. I ask the 52 nations who have given the Ethiopian people a promise to help them in their resistance to the aggressor. What are they willing to do for Ethiopia? And the great powers who have promised the guarantee of collective security to small nations, to small states of whom weighs the weight that they may one day suffer the fate of Ethiopia. I ask, what measures do you intend to take? Representatives of the world, I have come to Geneva to discharge in your midst the most painful of duties of a head of state. What reply shall I take back to my people? June 1936, Geneva, Switzerland. And of course, this is the beginning of World War II. Have a great day.